The following is a Spirit Street production.
Iowa State football last season was a little bit of a whirlwind. Didn't get off to the best of starts. Ended the season really, really strong. I think there's a lot of high hopes in Cyclones Nation this year as what the football team is going to be, how the season's going to play out. We'll take a look at the schedule. It seems a little easier or slighter at the beginning, but gets really tough at the end as far as the conference. We'll talk about all that and more. This is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Big 12 Insiders. This is our man, Alec Busse, covers Iowa State for 24/7. Alec, how is it going?
Good. Thanks for having me back on again. I know it's been a little bit, but always happy to hop on the show and talk Cyclones and Big 12 with you guys.
Absolutely. We appreciate you giving us the time. So let's just dive in first. Iowa State, the season did not start off very well last year. I know we've covered that previously, but I think it ended really strong. I think, especially in conference play, winning that game against Kansas State. I thought it went great, about as good as it could go. Especially considering some of the defections that had happened, just right prior to that game, running back room, people jumping in the transfer portal. That's the one thing I can't stand about the portal is that when it happens, a lot of these kids know that they're leaving and then they kind of tank it on the season. But it was good to see Iowa State fought back. What does the program look like? What the overall health of the program look like now that we're at May 9th, moving into next year? What does the program look like now?
Yeah, I think they're really confident heading into the summer months where the program is at. They're top 5 in the country, I think, in returning production, both on offense and defense. And then just overall, they were super young last year, but it didn't prevent them from finishing with the 7-6 record after their loss to Memphis in the bowl game. And I think that kind of inspired a good amount of confidence about this team and this program heading into the 2024 season. And obviously, I think the Big 12 is looking at, a much different conference with a different makeup. And I think that creates excitement for the fan base on top of returning a roster that has the potential to be one of the dark horse contenders, I guess you could say, in the Big 12 in 2024 behind Utah and Arizona and, Kansas State, maybe Oklahoma State mixes in there as well. Having just played in the Big 12 title game and returning Alan Bowman and Ollie Gordon in the offensive backfield. But I think Iowa State just feels really excited about where this 2024 season could go. And especially just because of how much they have returning at the skill positions. But obviously, they return everyone across the offensive and defensive line. And when you do that, you have a lot of potential to be a successful team in the upcoming season.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I was going to go into, it's returning offensive and defensive line. When you have that kind of continuity, and they had some success, like I said, later on in the season, I just think it sets you up for everything. Look, you can bring in a new quarterback, you can bring in a new running back, but when you're starting with offensive line that have experience, that played well, I'm not saying they're played the best linemen in the country, but they played well. When you have that, it's a lot easier to bring other things along, but they're not doing that. They're not bringing other guys along. They've got a ton of experience coming back. They don't dip into the portal. I know we've kind of talked about that a little bit. They dip in there a little bit, but Iowa State, like I believe most outside of one program that will remain nameless, but most programs in the Big 12 have, for the most part, are developmental programs, and Iowa State is another one of those. I think that's another reason why you have to say that the program is in good shape.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that they are gaining confidence across the offensive and defensive lines heading into 2024, speaking specifically to the defensive line here, is it was just a really young group a year ago, but it ended up being a pretty productive group a season ago. They're returning a lot of impactful guys across the defensive line. Joey Peterson will come off of the edge. Tyler Onyedem will continue to come off of the edge. Trent Jones is someone that they're high on after a successful offseason. And then they've got a couple of young guys who are redshirt sophomores, and one's a redshirt freshman. And Ikena Ezeagu, he's a redshirt sophomore. And then Daniel Same, really good athlete, someone that they're confident in, coming off the edge with his speed and athleticism after a year in the program of just kind of gaining football IQ and adding a good amount of strength to get pass rush. And then on the interior, J.R. Singleton returns, Dom Orange also returns. Those are two guys that they're high on. And then Zamir Hawk is another redshirt freshman that they're pretty high on, and his potential to cause a pass rush and be a good run stuffer on the middle of the defensive line. And then offensively, they had some issues in the run game last year, run blocking. They didn't finish near the top of the Big 12 in rushing yards per game or anything like that. They were near the bottom, actually, averaged just about like 115, 120 rushing yards a game. But they returned their entire starting line on the offensive side of the ball, which means Jared Humphrey comes back. Jim Boniface comes back on the interior. James Neal will return at tackle. But it remains to be seen if he starts. They're adding a Princeton transfer tackle, Jalen Travis. He's likely to start at tackle. And then they're also bringing in Brendan Black, who started 7 games for Iowa State last season as a true freshman. So there's a lot to like about the line of scrimmage for Iowa State on each side of the ball. But, it's still a young group. And I think steps certainly need to be taken across the offensive line for the offense to continue to take positive steps forward, especially with kind of a reworked and new shaped offensive staff.
Right. So Rocco Becht, let's talk about him for a second. Look, the circumstances that he was kind of thrown into last year took a minute to get figured out, but the way that he progressed throughout the season, I got to think not only are Iowa State fans super excited, but I got to think the coaching staff is also super excited that, hey, we got this guy. We didn't know how good he was actually going to be. Played a lot earlier than what anticipated. And I just think that Iowa State, I think they've got something here at quarterback.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you there. I think that Becht is one of the more overlooked quarterbacks in the conference heading into 2024. People forget that he was a Big 12 Offensive Freshman of the Year last season.
Yes.
He passed for over 3,000 yards, had close to 25 touchdowns, still had like 7 or 8 interceptions on the year. You'd like to see that number come down, especially the pick sixes. He had a couple of those that were costly at different points in the season, one against Iowa, I believe. And I know he had one against Oklahoma too. Now, not that the pick six against Oklahoma kind of had a direct outcome on the game because Oklahoma blew Iowa State out early in the year. That being said, they're really high on him. He had a really good spring. He didn't show in Iowa State's last spring scrimmage, which was the only open practice availability to fans and press members. But everything that we have heard over at Cyclone Alert is that he's been impressive in the entire off season, especially in the spring. Has taken good steps, has a good rapport with new offensive coordinator and play caller, Taylor Mauser. And I think that you combine all those things, and his top 2 returning receivers are back. They added 1 receiver in the portal. They're trying to add another. They also returned Ben Bramer at tight end. That he could have a really strong redshirt sophomore season as well. With says a lot because of how many talented quarterbacks are in the Big 12 if he's able to become an all Big 12 quarterback.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think a lot of people for the most part, people always seem to overlook Iowa State. Even in basketball, we talked a lot about basketball this year and how teams, we don't know how good they are. And then you play them and you can't score and you can't do the things that you wanted to do. I'm just not sure why people aren't giving Iowa State the credit. Look, obviously, as a guy that played at Kansas State and follow the Big 12, I know how good they are. Does that come with any frustration within the fan base that teams or not necessarily even the national media, Alec? I'm just talking about Big 12 fans always seem to overlook Iowa State.
I think this offseason fans like it. Just because in the past when they've entered a season with expectations like they did in the fall of 2022,
right.
They were a preseason top 10 team. I think it was, or I guess it would have been the fall of 2021. Excuse me. They entered as a preseason top 10 team. They finished, I think, 7-5 or something around close to 500.
Right.
And one of the more underachieving teams relative to what their preseason expectations were. Now this year's team is kind of starting to get some looks here as, national media has kind of started to shift their focus away from the basketball transfer portal and more towards, the end of spring football and summer and all of that stuff. I've seen them kind of pop up in top 30s, top 35s here in the last week or so, which I think is like a fair landing spot for them, given everything that they have returning in the way they finished last season with a 6-3 record. But yeah, I think that the fan base actually kind of likes being overlooked this year, just because in the past when they've had high expectations, they haven't necessarily met them on the football field.
Gotcha.
And this year, I think that people are overlooking them because, like I said earlier, Utah is getting a lot of attention. K-State seems to be getting a lot of attention. Arizona's has decreased a little bit. since Jed Fish took the Washington job. But, those are 3 programs who look to be ranked within the top 15, 20 in the country.
Gotcha. So another thing, with so many people coming back, I gotta suspect there's not a ton of position battles that are going on right now that went on during the spring. I gotta think it's a ton of development and also depth building. I gotta believe that that's what happened with spring practice this year for Iowa State.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I mean, you'll get the stereotypical line that everyone's competing for a spot every day from a coaching staff, but I don't necessarily expect a lot of those returning starters from last season to lose their spot across the starting lineup for Iowa State entering 2024. I think one of the big goals that Matt Campbell had for his entire program in the entire spring was just a focus from the players every single day to be the best you that you can be. I think last year with the group that, as young as it was, they were almost trying to reestablish the identity and the culture of Iowa State football in a way. And now that that's kind of been established by a lot of these same players that are returning, they want to kind of challenge them to push it to the next step and get a little bit better and reach the next heights that they can achieve as a group. So that's how I kind of view it with where they're at right now and everything that I've kind of heard and observed from what Coach Campbell has said throughout the spring.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. Like I said, development, roster building. I think that's kind of the Big 12's thing. I've talked to a couple people on here, and they said that's a lot of it is just, look, yeah, there's position battles at certain spots, but we got to develop depth. One thing is that I've noticed, Alec, as far as some of the new teams, and not necessarily the Arizonas or the Arizona State teams, but it's more of the Houstons and the Cincinnatis, the UCFs of the world. When they came into the conference, they're thinking, man, we got to get bigger up front. And one of them actually pointed out Iowa State, when they came to town, I mean, they were just physically bigger than we were. And I'm like, yeah, that's what you kind of got to get used to. Is that one of the emphasis on just getting those big, strong, athletic linemen that Iowa State seems to churn out and put out?
Yeah, I think that they've done a good job of retaining talent across the offensive line. I know that, and the defensive line. There was rumors at various points in the offseason of various linemen potentially leaving or being tampered with, but Iowa State was able to retain them all. So that says a lot. But I think one thing that Matt Campbell has done really well throughout his tenure is, now that he's been here and he's entering his 9th season, is if you just look at a scholarship chart or you look at class balance across the offensive line, it's really strong. They've got 2 kids in every single class. That's really, really good. That's exactly where you want it to be across your offensive line at a minimum. Their junior class has 4 kids across it, and all of them are red shirts. So they're pretty well built across the offensive and defensive line. And when you land 2 or 3 kids every single class across the offensive line, that allows you to maintain quality depth because those kids don't transfer as much. They seem to understand the commitment to development. They understand that they're not going to come in and play right away because of the physical challenges that are there. And for whatever reason, it's the personality type of offensive lineman just doesn't seem to lend itself to wanting to transfer around a lot.
Right. One question before we take a quick break here. With all this transfer and NIL and all this stuff, and I know this is probably an easy answer and a simple answer, I got to believe Iowa State fans are about as fed up with all this constant movement as everybody else is, and just want a resolution, regardless of what the outcome is. With this big case, the House versus the NCAA, they just want it over and done with. That's been my consensus for the people that I've asked, and I'm asking you the same thing. I got to believe that Iowa State fans, hey, look, we don't like what it is, but at least come to a consensus so we can move forward and get this thing over and done with.
Yeah, I don't know if I've been too in tune, I guess, on the feelings that Iowa State fans have on the current state of things with the portal. There's certainly some on our message boards or in different places that have voiced frustrations about it. But I think that's also just a combination of hey, this isn't what it used to be. I don't like how this isn't what it was when I grew up. Someone like me who's 24, I don't mind the current state of it. I find the portal to be a lot of fun to follow and to kind of track. Now at the same time, I don't think that the constant player movement is maybe the greatest thing ever for college sports. That said, at the same time, it's a lot of fun and people enjoy clicking on it and reading it. So I kind of am in the business of it. content creators love it because there's a lot of things to talk about at a time of the year when traditionally college football and college basketball aren't at the top of the mind.
Right.
Like right now in May and June and July coming up. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a general understanding that the way things are set up right now maybe isn't the most sustainable, and that it's likely going to change maybe faster than people ever thought it would. I mean, it seems like a settlement could be coming in the House case within the next, 8 to 10 months.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, and I get what you're saying. Look, as a former player, transferring and all of that, I thought it should have been something. I just think there's got to be some rules to it, but I don't mind it. I like the freedom, but the guys that have played 4 years at 4 different schools, sometimes that can be a little bit much. So we're going to take a quick break here. We'll be right back. On the other side of this, we'll talk to Alec a little bit about the upcoming schedule, what Iowa State looks like there, and then a quick question about some of the gambling scandals that went on in the state of Iowa and at the two big universities. We'll be right back once we hear from Synergy Financial Partners.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Big 12 Insiders. Again, it's Brien Hanley with Alec Busse. So we're talking Iowa State today. Let's take a look. I'm going to dive into the schedule here of Iowa State, and I'm looking at it, and it looks a little tough, Alec, let's just say at the beginning, not horrible. But at the end of the year, it looks like the schedule gets tough. When you talk about those last 4 football games, the one reprieve that I will say this, they get a reprieve when they play Kansas. Although Kansas, I think, is going to be really good. They're playing the game at Arrowhead. If anybody knows anything about Iowa State, I don't care that it's technically a Kansas home game. Arrowhead, I guarantee you, will have 60% minimum Iowa State fans at that game. I guarantee that happens, Alec.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how they do ticketing for that game. I haven't read, and I would need to talk to Michael Swain about this, how KU Athletics is doing tickets for those games at Arrowhead. I know they're also playing at the MLS Stadium in Kansas City.
Right.
I'm interested to see like how that's going to work because Arrowhead's obviously, I don't how big is Arrowhead? Is it?
It's close to 80,000.
Yeah. So are they going to try and sell it out every weekend? Like, are they going to sell potentially 80,000 tickets to KU fans? Like, I don't know how that's going to work.
Right.
I don't know if like that one weekend they're going to try and make it like a bigger deal and they're going to open up extra seating for it. I don't know. Obviously Kansas fans have like a newfound excitement about KU football. And if this year and Jalen Daniels able to stay healthy, like I would imagine that carries through into November like it has in the last couple of seasons.
Right.
But yeah, I think that game being at Arrowhead is a lot of fun. Like I'm generally a proponent of college games to be held on college campuses. I think there's a few examples where it works when they're not. Like Red River, I think is great on a neutral site at the Cotton Bowl. I think the cocktail party between Georgia and Florida works really well in Jacksonville. But like for the most part, play them on campus. But this is fun as like a one-off, I think. And given the circumstances, I think it's really cool that they're playing it at Arrowhead. But yeah, it's part of a really tough last month for Iowa State. I mean, Cincinnati, I don't think is going to be too good. And they come to Jack Trice the following week. But after that, they go on the road to Utah, and then they play K-State in the last week of the year. It's kind of similar to the end of the 2023 season for Iowa State, where their last month was probably the most difficult. They lost at home to KU, but they did go on the road and beat BYU, and then their last 2 games were against Texas, the best team in the league, and then K-State, one of the better teams in the league, down in Manhattan. So it's kind of funny that like in a schedule and in a conference where you feel like it's really balanced from like top to bottom, where there's not a lot of gap from like team 1 to team 16 in 2024, that, K-State Iowa State probably gets 2 of the 3 to 4 best projected teams in the conference in the last 2-3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, makes it a little bit tough. But again, I think Iowa State's going to be there in the end. I think with what they have coming back, I really, really like their chances and winning more games. I think it's a minimum, Alec. And again, I'm not trying to predict schedules or anything like this, but I think minimum 8-win season this year for Iowa State. Taking a look at one thing, Iowa. I've been asking everybody, Alec, about their rivals. And Iowa State, obviously, rival with Iowa. Number one, I'm just going to assume.
I thought you were going to go with the
conference.
Twitter beef going on today between K-State and Iowa State people.
Is there?
Yeah, there is.
Okay, gotcha. And that was going to be what my thing was, is like, look, I'm assuming that Iowa is the rival, but if you ask K-State and Iowa State people, they can't stand each other. What is going on with that, my man?
Well, Iowa and Iowa State makes sense, right? Like
yes.
In some ways, it's like a big brother, little brother kind of vibe within the state. And I think it's unique because I think in most states, right, like the state schools generally are in the same conference.
Right.
When they're both big schools, like in Kansas, obviously, like KU and K-State. In Oklahoma for the longest time it was Oklahoma and Oklahoma State.
Right.
Those are just easy examples. But in Iowa, it's never been that way. Iowa's always been in the Big Ten, and Iowa State's always been in the Big 6, Big 8, Big 12, whatever they're going to call it in the future. And I think that kind of creates an interesting dynamic where they only play once a year in every single sport instead of twice. And Iowa's obviously been a little bit more historically successful, especially in football. And they've kind of controlled the rivalry over the last decade or so. But at the same time, I think Iowa State feels like they do their best of competing. And the Cyhawk game is always a lot of fun. And I think what's cool for Iowa State fans is they have their non-conference rival that they play every single year, but then they also have a couple within the conference that they basically play every single year, whether that's KU, which in football, KU for the longest time wasn't very good, and no one really kind of got excited to beat KU besides K-State fans. And now, KU is kind of rising up, and I think there's some natural dislike for that. But obviously, Farmageddon, I think, is one that if you ask Iowa State fans who they want to beat most, I think you'll probably get most of the answers would be towards Iowa, but the other school would be K-State. So it's a lot of fun to kind of have two rivalries on the schedule, and one at the beginning and one kind of at the end of the year for Iowa State fans, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just always wondered about that and how that was. Being where I'm from, I understand that. I mean, I'm a diehard Louisville fan because that's where I grew up, and they kind of have the same kind of feel. Is that Louisville and Kentucky? They're not in the same conference, never have been, never will be. But it's Louisville always has kind of that little brother complex, and Kentucky is more of a national brand. Not more of it is a big time national brand, and while Louisville is a national brand, and not near is what Kentucky is. So I kind of feel that I understand that philosophy or that way of thinking. One quick question. Again, I promise I won't hold you too long. It's talking about this whole gambling thing. The probe came out, and again, I don't want to get too in depth with it because, I've asked and I've talked about this before. It's like the guys aren't saying they didn't do it. And I don't think any of this that has come out here recently is saying that people are innocent because they did it. But how they got found out, all of it was illegal for the most part, is what I'm reading up on. What are Iowa State fans feeling about that aspect of it? Thinking, you know what? Yeah, these guys did it and they're guilty, but the way that it went about, that the state went about this was all underhanded and dirty, and they probably didn't have to do that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic. I think personally, it's one of those things for fans, at least in my opinion, where they're kind of ready for it to all be over. Yeah. Like I think throughout last season, like entering the season, a lot of them felt, okay, let's move on. Football's here. Let's talk about the players that are here. And at the same time, we can complain about some of the past and reasoning why some of the other players aren't here. I think that the way that it all kind of was gathered is certainly been brought negative attention. Like it was pretty much gathered in an illegal manner without a warrant. And there was no reason or, motivation for the state to be looking into illegal sports gambling. Like there wasn't a tip or like anything like that. It was just like, hey, we're going to look into this because we want to look into it. So there's no reason for a warrant. There's no reason to investigate any of those things. And then kind of found the information without a warrant. using a geofence, which isn't allowed. I don't even know what a geofence is, but like, I guess you can get a lot of information from it. And, you know, they used that information to get like account numbers with different gambling sports books, whether it was FanDuel, DraftKings, whatever it was. And then they subpoenaed the, you know, sports books for who owned those accounts. And they saw it was often underage athletes at both Iowa and Iowa State. And then they also saw it was just athletes in general wagering on things that, you know, you couldn't wager on as a student athlete. So I think in general, I think a lot of fans are just kind of ready for the whole thing to be over. But now as like more information has come out, it's just more and more of like this is a sham. Like this is dumb. Like, why did we waste money on this? And I don't know if this is a great comparison or not, but remember when like the FBI investigation in college basketball dropped and everyone was like, oh, this could be really bad for all the schools. Like this could be really bad. And then like, as we all kind of like learn more about it, we were like, our tax dollars went to investigating shoe companies paying to send kids to a certain school. Like this is the dumbest stuff ever. Like, why did they, like, this is so stupid. You have way more important things to investigate, like drugs and, you know, illegal crime. Like they didn't do anything wrong. Like, sorry, we're bribing, you know, DeAndre Ayton to go to Arizona. Like, who cares?
That was my whole thing, Alec. I think it's a good analogy, number one. I think you're dead on because I'm like, nobody cared about this. Yeah, first of all, anybody that pays attention to college athletics, everybody was cheating. Everybody cheats. Either it's a little bit or it's a lot. People are cheating. It's gone on forever. Okay, it just is what it is. And now you're going to tell me that you're mad because they figured out a way to cheat better by having the shoe companies actually give people the money. I'm like, to me, that's ingenious. I go, but it is what it is. It keeps it away from the school. I know people don't want to hear that, but you're dead on. Why are we using the FBI to track down Adidas to find out who was giving somebody's father or mother money when, there's drugs being smuggled in from here? I don't want to get political. That's not my thing, but I wasn't think you're dead on. I think you're dead right.
Political at all. It was just so, I don't know. I remember when that news broke. I think I was a junior or a senior in high school. And I was like obviously a big college basketball fan and had known like that everyone was cheating, but at that time didn't really understand like how it worked and like where the money was coming from to give players to go to certain schools or whatever. And I remember like hearing about this. I was like, this is horrible. Like this could lead to a lot of issues in college basketball. I was like reading things from Jeff Goodman and other national reporters at the time. And even they were like, this is bad. Like this could be really bad. And then as time has gone on, now everyone's like, that was the stupidest thing ever. Like, why did we do that? And I think even, you know, obviously there's been a lot of schools that haven't been punished for it. Oklahoma State, I think, was the only one that was actually legitimately punished for it with like a postseason ban and different things. And KU's punishments came out in the fall. It was just like, these aren't even punishments. Like, they didn't lose a scholarship. It was probation, which I don't even know what probation means at this point for school. Exactly. It never meant anything. It was just stupid. And I think that's kind of how a lot of fans, whether you're a Hawkeye fan or a Cyclone fan in the state, kind of feel about the gambling thing. Like, they just kind of feel like they were maybe given not even a short, like they just felt like it was a waste of time, like in a waste of investigation. Like, am I saying that, you know, what the kids did and the gambling was the right thing to do? No, I'm like most certainly not saying that, you know, underage gambling is something that's okay, but like it happens all the time. Like I went to college and all my friends, my freshman and sophomore year, were gambling on private sports books. Like ones were running sports books. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's like, it's just not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. I think that's just kind of how fans kind of felt.
Well, good for them, man, because like I said, I brought it up. I wanted to kind of get the feel of maybe what fans at Iowa State were feeling. To me, personally, I think it was a big to-do about nothing. Yes, the guys were gambling on sports. Yes, you need to punish them. Move on. And that's the end of it. And I just think that's kind of how we have to live with this thing. It's just the state came up with their way of doing it. It was stupid. The kids did what they did. Yeah, you can't gamble, sports gamble. You know better. Move on. And that's kind of what happened. So,
well, and I think too, it's just like, I think part of the frustration that fans had was like they started this investigation. All this stuff kind of like popped off after the Alabama baseball investigation with their coach getting suspended or fired for tipping the gambler off in Cincinnati. And I feel like we all kind of know that these things are going to happen now that sports gambling is so prevalent in our day-to-day life. But it was only in Iowa where these athletes were getting hit. Like it wasn't in Kansas. It wasn't in Illinois or Minnesota or Nebraska. Why wasn't it any other state having their athletes get dinged by this? It just felt like, you're not naive that an athlete at X school could be gambling on Y college sport.
Right.
And in Iowa was just the one state where they seemed to kind of get their alert set off by what was happening in Alabama with the baseball coach. And they're like, hey, maybe we should look into this a little bit further and see if we have things going on. And then they went about it in a non-legal way that, kind of infringed upon the 4th and 14th Amendment rights that those athletes have. Well, and those people have more than athletes at that point.
Right. Well, one thing, and then we can move off of this, but I think another thing about this, Alec, is a lot of people out there in a lot of other states, they kind of know what's going on. And it's kind of what you said. They're just not they just don't want to look, because if they do look, they're going to find something that they don't want to find. And so they just say, you know what, to hell with this. We don't need to look at this because we get it. They're college kids. And number one, it's not just athletes. They tried to act like it was only athletes that were doing this. And to me, that was insane, but whatever. But I think a lot of other states are just like, we know what's going on. We're not going to look at this, because if we look, we're going to find some stuff that we do not want to find. And we don't need that. Just let dogs lie and just move on. Because like you mentioned earlier, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. There's no reason to do it. So I'm glad Iowa State they're attempting to move on and get all this behind them. I think they've done a good job of that. I think this year on the football field, I think they'll do an even better job. And that way, nobody will even be talking about this nonsense moving forward. So I want to thank you, Alec, for taking the time to come on today, man. Stick around. I'm going to end the show. We're going to have one quick break, but I do have a question for you once the show's over. So if you don't mind, just give me a quick second, and I'll just talk to you. So I appreciate everybody. Again, one final break with Synergy Financial Partners.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Look, Iowa State gets overlooked. I think it's time that we stop overlooking them. I think they're going to have a really good football team this year. They were young last year. We know all the circumstances that they had to deal with last year. I believe this year is going to be a much better year early. Last year they went through a lot early that kind of set them behind the 8 ball. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. Look out, because that early conference schedule, I think they've got a chance to run off several games in a row and get on a roll. And when they do face the perceived more difficult part of their schedule, I think they'll be ready. So look out for Iowa State this year. I think they're going to be a team to be reckoned with within the Big 12. Thanks, everybody, for coming out today and watching. Remember, like, follow, subscribe. We appreciate you. We'll see you tomorrow.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please